What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, January 10th, 2018, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And I'm going to apologize up front. I did not get any sleep last night at all, so I'm a little tired and fluffy-brained. My brain is on puree mode here. And so we're going to go through the news here and take the phone calls, and I hope a lot of people will call on in to help out with the show here a little bit today. Getting into the news here, as you know, yesterday, Dianne Feinstein released, or leaked, if you prefer, the transcript of the testimony of the founder of Fusion GPS before congressional investigators, which angered a great many people. And apparently Feinstein thought that this was going to harm Donald Trump. But as it turns out, people have gone through the transcript now, and it turns out there is still, in that transcript, no evidence of any collusion between Trump and Russia. It's all about how this dossier was being passed back and forth, which we know was completely discredited. So, again, a big nothing burger with extra cheese. It's amazing how this stuff works here. Now, the former FBI assistant director has come out with a comment, it's being quoted all over the net right now, saying that there is no question the Clinton Foundation is a criminal conspiracy. We've had reports coming out in the last few days basically saying it was a money laundering. It was a money laundering operation for the Clintons and their friends, and we had that anonymous FBI source who was posting to the web saying that almost everybody inside the Beltway was dirty from this, using it to hire money, or to hide money that they didn't want to have subject to tax. So, big stink over there. It needs to be investigated. At the very least, it should lose its tax-exempt status, because to have the status of tax-exempt foundation, you have to donate 51% of your money to charity, and the Clinton Foundation comes nowhere near that. They were down in the single digits, donating to a little bit of charity, usually in front of media cameras to make it look good. But they don't really qualify for a 501c3, and that exemption should be revoked retroactively. That would make the Clintons personally liable for taxes on all that money. Now, apparently the House chairman has asked Paul Ryan to declassify all of the Department of Justice and FBI documents related to the Russian dossier and how it was used to justify a FISA warrant. And, yeah, this is big. This is very big. Because if the FISA warrants were based on fraudulent data, which we know the dossier was, then anything acquired under the warrant is inadmissible at the very least. Now, there's a story that was going around from Investment Watch blog. Sessions indicts Clinton after Huma Abedin charged for lying to FBI about Wiener emails. The headline is overblown. I couldn't find confirmation that there's an actual indictment, but there is no question that Huma Abedin did in fact lie to the FBI about classified emails on her and her estranged husband's Wiener's laptop. They found at least 18 on there that anybody knows about, and I'm sure they're still going through them. And she said she did not back up her emails to the laptop, which obviously she did. She lied under oath. That's perjury. So there should be an indictment. There isn't yet that I can find, but there should be an indictment, definitely. Alrighty, now as you know, the deep state still wants to get rid of Donald Trump. This whole Russiagate thing, they've had a year to try and push this. They've gained no traction with it whatsoever. And so now, apparently, they're trying a plan B. They're going to a backup plan. And apparently, Representative Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania has introduced a new bill into Congress requiring presidential candidates to undergo full medical exams and release the results to the public. It's called the Stable Genius Act. And supposedly it's in response to claims made in Michael Wolff's book Fire and Fury, saying that the President Trump is not mentally stable. Now, this is a little pathetic, if you ask me. It's a little pathetic here. But they do have an area of concern, which is that Donald Trump's father, Frank, succumbed to Alzheimer's disease, and Donald Trump himself is 71 years old. And he's getting into that area where he could be getting into that. We know that Ronald Reagan, during his second term in office, was dealing with Alzheimer's disease and wasn't very functional. George Bush Sr. was actually running most of the show out of the White House. So there is a possibility there. In the past, political parties had always insisted that their main candidates undergo a medical exam and an evaluation to make sure they were going to be able to do the job. Obviously, they didn't do that with Hillary Clinton last year. But in this case, this is clearly politically motivated. They're still trying to find a way to get Donald Trump out of that Oval Office because he cannot be relied on to maintain the cover-ups on all the crime and corruption that has been going on year after year after year. Okay, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on back to Congress, just moments after Trump requested a tough primary for California Senator Dianne Feinstein for leaking that Fusion GPS interview, he's losing a Republican from California. Darrell Issa, who happens to be the richest member of Congress on a civil service salary, figure that one out, he's announced he's going to retire. He's not going to seek re-election. So he's going to be leaving the Congress here as well. Now, as you know, down in Virginia, they had a House of Delegates race that was so close. It was a tie. It was an absolute dead tie. And it came down to a bowl drawing where they put the two candidates' names in a bowl and they picked one out. And the Republican won. And the Democrat went to court saying this is not fair. The appeals court has now ruled saying that, yes, in the event of an absolute dead tie in the election, the bowl drawing is perfectly legal. So that is pretty much that. Okay, there is a gentleman, James Dolan. He's a software engineer. And supposedly he has committed suicide at the age of 36. Now, he was one of the people who created Secure Drop, which was a sort of WikiLeaks clone, where you could post information, if you were a whistleblower, anonymously. And the other creator of Secure Drop and Reddit co-founder Aaron Swartz supposedly, he died 5 years ago to the very day. So maybe James Dolan's life was really going wrong. Or maybe there is now a covert attack on anybody who's creating any kind of a system that would challenge the deep state in their surveillance of the internet, or their secrecy against the American people. But there are too many suspicious deaths, and we all should be very, very concerned here. Now, getting on back to the Golden Globes, as you know, there was this supposed protest against sexual harassment at the Golden Globes. Everybody was wearing black. The set was draped in black. and Oprah Winfrey came on out and made a 9-minute speech on the issue. But none of the actual accusers of Harvey Weinstein were invited. And now Juanita Broderick has come forward mentioning that none of the people of the Golden Globes, especially Oprah Winfrey, mentioned her name, because sexual harassment and sexual assault exists outside of the film industry. And it does make it look like the Golden Globes protest of sexual harassment was little more than public relations and damage control. And they don't want to really deal with the problem, they just want to make it look like they're dealing with the problem, a lot like Congress tends to do. Over in New York, State Assemblywoman Pamela Harris has been indicted on 11 counts of fraud and tampering. And she's a Democrat. Not that the Republicans are any better. But basically, it turns out, again, taxpayer money was involved. And it does seem like there's an epidemic of these indictments coming. And that's a good thing. We should clean house. But it is a reminder that the kind of individual who seeks these positions of power and authority, it is the curse of political power, that it attracts the very sort of people who should never be allowed to have it. And that is a major problem. I almost think that in the future, at some point, there ought to be a system for finding leaders that simply goes on out and looks at ordinary Americans and just selects the very best people who could do the job, and they get drafted into these positions of member of Congress or the president, even if they don't want to be there. So we find the very best administrator, somebody who's altruistic, who's really thinking about the welfare of the nation itself, and you grab them and you put them in the Oval Office and you say, here, you are sentenced to 4 years in the Oval Office, and if you do a really good job, we're going to extend that to 8 years. And you just say, this is your job. We need you to run the country. And we take all those people who want to be members of Congress and want to be the president, and we just put them out on a reservation out there in the West someplace where they can live and argue with each other and be happy and pleasant. Because people want these positions because they can profit from them through corruption. I mean, if you look at how much money gets raised and spent for a campaign for Congress or the White House versus how much they actually get paid for the job, it's obvious that they're there for something much larger than that paycheck. And you look at some of the members of Congress, how wealthy they have become over the years, and you realize it can't possibly have been done just with the money they're paid for their salaries. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So, okay. Now then, let's get into the war zones. A lot of wars going on. Here a war, there a war, everywhere a war, E-I-E-I-O. Over in Syria, the militants' defense has collapsed in southern Idlib. The Syrian Arab Army, the Tiger Forces and allies are advancing in the Abu al-Duhur Air Base area in southern Idlib and have liberated a bunch of villages, Jakusiya, Al-Rajan, Miraya, Tamak, Mial, Al-Adeliyah, and others from the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda. They're always changing their names over there. According to pro-government sources, the Syrian Arab Army also started a bombing campaign against positions of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in the air base itself, and the Tiger Forces attacked militant positions in its vicinities. So if the Syrian army keeps up the current pace of the advance, it will reach Abu al-Duhur within the next 2 to 3 days. So basically, the Syrian government forces and their allies are winning this war, and the U.S.-backed rebels are losing. And the U.S. doesn't want to admit it's lost this. It'll pull out the rug underneath the much larger policy of dollariferizing the entire Middle East and basically kill the momentum for this program. So we can count on the United States government to just keep pouring resources into Syria, not because they think they can win, they just don't want to admit that they've lost, either in Syria or Afghanistan. Now, the other day we were reporting on this first-of-a-kind coordinated drone attack against one of the Russian air bases that are inside Syria with the permission of the Syrian government. The Russians are allowed to be there. The U.S. is not. And apparently it's now come on out that there was a United States reconnaissance aircraft, a spy plane, that was circling overhead during this drone attack. So it's beginning to look like maybe the drone attack was something that was put together by the U.S.-backed rebels with U.S. support. And it's a very risky thing to do. The U.S. directly, militarily confronting Russia, we could see a major war just erupt from that. It's a real game of brinksmanship. Now, during the Cold War, the 50s and 60s, yes, the U.S. and Russia were sort of fighting each other in these third world locations. It was all proxy wars. But a direct confrontation, that is to be avoided. We came dangerously close during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But right now it seems like U.S. military policy is getting more and more reckless all the time. And they are risking a major confrontation, which I don't think the U.S. can win. Over in Afghanistan, a video has surfaced showing U.S. Special Forces basically committing a war crime. And the video shows a military truck passing a civilian truck on a paved road at normal speed. And a U.S. soldier fires directly, intentionally at the driver of the civilian truck without any discernible reason. And that is a war crime. You're not supposed to be out there just gunning down the civilians at random. And so this video is causing a huge amount of embarrassment for the U.S. government, and certainly is providing fodder to people saying that maybe it's time for the United States to get out of Afghanistan entirely. Now, the U.S. at this point is controlling the cities in Afghanistan. They are not controlling the countryside, especially out toward the east where all the mountains are, which is where the Soviet Union bogged down and was unable to accomplish anything. Afghanistan has a very bad reputation. It's called the graveyard of empires. And a lot of countries have got in there, and they have met with disaster. The last military commander to conquer and successfully control Afghanistan was Alexander the Great, and he only kept it for 3 years. I really do think it is time for the United States to get out of there. I think it's time for the United States to call up this war agenda. They're not succeeding. They're spending huge amounts of money. They're impoverishing the American people. Our country is being neglected. All of our tax money is going to these military adventures, which are producing nothing. I think it's gone on long enough, and I think it's time for Americans to stand up and say, enough is enough. 17 years of war. It's time to bring our soldiers back on home. It's time to bring our money back on home and start working on building up our country again. Repair the roads, repair the rails, repair the bridges, restore the factories, and start the path back to being a manufacturing superpower, which we used to be. We are no longer, of course. Now, getting back to Afghanistan, apparently there was a program to revive the Afghan economy, and they too are missing a bunch of money. Over $500 million has gone missing, and they don't know where it went to. We're going to do a quick break for commercials here. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So apparently actually more than $500 million has gone missing in Afghanistan from the Pentagon program to revive their economy. And it's hardly a unique occurrence. We saw exactly the same thing over in Iraq, where the U.S. was delivering cash over there following the war, literally on pallets, wooden pallets stacked with cash, wrapped in plastic, and a lot of it just vanished. And I think to the average American taxpayer, they're going to find that a little bit upsetting. Now, over in Iran, things appear to be changing just a little tiny bit. And we're starting to see some waffling back and forth on this idea of ending the nuclear deal and even the sanctions relief. And it appears Congress will not have a plan to improve the Iran deal ready by this Friday, when the waiver of U.S. sanctions against the Iranian regime is set to expire. Now, the original P5+1 deal was Iran would end its nuclear program, the U.S. would lift the sanctions. But the U.S. basically has the sanctions still in place, but under waiver, which is why every once in a while the president has to recertify that Iran is in compliance. And the fact that there is no plan from Congress to change the Iran deal may force Donald Trump's hand. He may have to recertify the deal because Iran is in compliance. The Aiea is over there inspecting all the time, and they continue to report that Iran is keeping their word about the deal. So now we're seeing pressure coming in from SecDef Mattis, Sec State Tillerson, and National Security Advisor McMaster to basically say there needs to be a new accord regarding Iran's ballistic missile program and push the sanctions on that. Now, the reason that Iran wants ballistic missiles, and it's not clear still whether they wanted nuclear weapons or not, these are weapons of deterrence. These are weapons that are in existence to convince other nations to leave you alone. And Iran has every right to have them. Every nation has every right to have them, even North Korea. The reason the United States is trying to bring pressure onto countries to surrender nuclear programs and long-range ballistic missiles is to reduce the cost of an eventual invasion. Iran knows this. North Korea knows this. We know this. And again, you need to look back at that track record of the United States. They went in and told Libya, surrender your nuclear program, which was in its very earliest stages, and we will leave you alone. And Libya surrendered their nuclear program, they shut it down, and the U.S. invaded. The U.S. told Saddam Hussein, surrender your chemical weapons, we'll leave you alone. And Saddam did surrender his chemical weapons. The United Nations verified it, and the U.S. invaded. The U.S. told Bashar al-Assad in Syria, surrender your chemical weapons, we'll leave you alone. Assad surrendered his chemical weapons under supervision of the Russian deal brokered by Putin, and the U.S. still invaded. So everybody knows what's going on here. The U.S. is trying to disarm everybody with the goal of ultimately invading them at low cost, because invasion doesn't make any sense if it costs you more than you're going to gain from the invasion. So I think Iran is probably going to put their foot down about the ballistic missile issue. They need to protect their country. They need to protect their country from being invaded. And I think more and more countries are realizing that the United States cannot be trusted in any of the promises that they've made. And disarmament is just an absolutely foolish thing to do. Now, getting on over to Pakistan, as you know, we're seeing all of a sudden these antagonistic provocations by the United States against Pakistan, beginning with the cutting off of funding, followed by the insults from Donald Trump that Pakistan has just returned lies and deceit for that $30+ billion that have been given them over the last 15 years. And it does look like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, Pakistan is in the crosshairs. So Pakistan is now responding, and they have suspended all military and intelligence cooperation with the United States. And basically, was announced by Defense Minister Khurram Dastgir Khan at a speech at the Institute of Strategic Studies in Islamabad just yesterday. So things are going from bad to worse. International relations are on the decline. The United States seems to be making enemies all over the globe. Very few friends. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And it's an interesting little article over in mondaweiss.net. If you genuinely back the Palestinian cause, you have to support the right of return. Now, what that basically means is when the United Nations accepted the new nation of Israel as a member, there were two conditions that were placed on that membership. And the first one was a right of return, that the Palestinians had a right to go back to their homes and villages that were basically overrun during the creation of the nation of Israel. And the second condition was that if the Palestinians, of their own free will, chose not to go back to their homes, they would be financially compensated for their lost properties. Israel, of course, has not complied with either one of those conditions to this very day here. But again, along with simply recognizing the state of Palestine that they're trying to create, the Palestinians do have a right of return, recognized by the United Nations, and that should be supported. And apparently, this is an issue which is at the forefront of a lot of the friction between Israel and Palestine. And of course, Israel doesn't want the Palestinians to come back. They want the Palestinians to go away, go to some other country. And it's causing a great deal of friction. Now, over in Korea, it looks like, thankfully, tensions are pulling back, at least for the moment. North Korea and South Korea are talking. North Korea is going to send athletes to the Olympics in South Korea next month. And that's a good thing. The two Koreas would like to reunify. They call it the Sunshine Policy. And South Korea's current president is very much in favor of that. 5 years ago, they were on the verge of reunifying until some outside meddling came on in. But South Korea's President Moon Jae-in is basically crediting Donald Trump for the North Korea talks, saying that the pressure put on North Korea has brought them to open the dialogue there and improve ties between the two Koreas. And he is warning that if the talks fail, and if North Korea resumes weapons tests, that there will be more sanctions. So there's a little bit of an iron fist inside that velvet glove. I'd like to see the two Koreas reunify and settle their differences. North Korea has the resources, South Korea has the industry. They could actually be a very wealthy nation if they reunified here. Now, a lot of people are talking about Donald Trump's new nuclear posture. Basically, the Trump administration is expected to reveal a new doctrine which basically expands the cases in which nuclear weapons would be used, including conventional attack. If the United States is attacked with non-nuclear weapons, they would respond with nuclear weapons. And apparently, the new doctrine will allow for the development of new warheads as well. So we're back to a weapons race, an arms race, with all of these horrible, horrible weapons. I remember at the peak of the Cold War, Russia and the United States had enough nuclear warheads where if they were detonated all at the same time, it really would end all life on Earth. And a lot of people were very concerned. There was even a movie made called On the Beach about what it would be like following a nuclear war when it was only a matter of time before the radiation got to you and killed you. And the movie is still around. Every once in a while it shows up on cable TV, and it's definitely worth watching. It takes place mostly in Australia, which is the last part of the Earth that is livable following this. And toward the end of the Cold War, of course, there were some treaties. In fact, even right after the near miss at the Cuban Missile Crisis, both the United States and Russia started pulling back, started pulling down the nuclear arsenals to a more reasonable level. Now it looks like the U.S. is starting to ramp it up again. And it didn't start with Trump. George W. Bush authorized the creation of new warheads and the overhaul, update, refurbishment of existing warheads. So it really is very, very dangerous. And at some point there may be a disaster with nuclear weapons. And if it doesn't drive the human race to extinction, maybe there'll be a lesson learned and humanity will say no more of these. Because we really have reached the point where a single mistake can lead to our extinction. That's a very real possibility, and we ought to think about that here. All right, let's talk about the economic news a little bit. Sears is in serious trouble, and apparently they're trying to find some new financing. They're having trouble. Sears has been on the edge of bankruptcy for years now. And they're now admitting that, yes, indeed, this last holiday shopping season was disappointing. And we sort of knew that was going to be the case, despite all the brouhaha about a wonderful shopping season. Everybody's buying stuff. Get on out there, whip out the plastic, and buy all kinds of stuff. It didn't really work out. And Sears has started new discussions with lenders. They're trying to renegotiate terms on roughly $1 billion of non-first lien debt. And the debt concessions would be accompanied by another $200 million of cost cuts, which means store closings and layoffs of sales staff. Now, if you're my age, you will remember that Sears has been this major iconic retailer for all of our lives. They actually began as a mail-order business, the Sears and Roebuck catalog. And you'd get the catalog, and you'd look through it, and you'd order stuff, and it would be delivered, and they were very successful. And in the days before Playboy magazine, young boys would grab the catalog and look at the lingerie ads. And then, of course, they expanded into brick and mortar, and they've been very, very successful. They're an iconic American retailer. And they're at the edge of bankruptcy. And I think that tells you, as much as anybody else, how serious the economic problems are in this country when these iconic retailers are in this kind of trouble. The fact of the matter is that Chapter 11 bankruptcies have doubled from a year ago. So we are still in financial hard times. We know that there are roughly 100 million Americans who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. And that tells us the economy is in serious trouble. And all we get from corporate media and the government is, everything's fine, just go on out and buy stuff. They don't want you to realize how bad things are. Because we know who did it, Wall Street, the money junkies. The money junkies have ruined the economy, and they don't want to be held to account for it here. The World Bank is out there saying that global economic growth has peaked. In other words, the World Bank is saying that we're maxed out. Remember, when they talk about growth in the economy, what they're talking about is the total aggregate debt. When they say the economy is growing, it means more debt is being generated. They use the word growth to make it sound like it's a good thing. And to the private central bankers, obviously, it is a good thing when people are going deeper into debt, because it means more interest payments. The World Bank is saying basically that everybody, it's maxed out. Nobody can go any further into debt, which is another reason why there's a big push for a global war, because war forces government to borrow more to pay for the war. And when the war is over, nations have to borrow even more on top of that to rebuild from the war. War is the bankers' richest harvest of debt. Bankers love wars. So I wrote that article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. Article coming out of Investment Watch blog, the economy is in the process of being reworked for the transition. And not sure where the transition is going to take us. We know they're pushing the cashless society, where the banks literally are holding all the money, and you have to ask for their permission via that little plastic card to get your food and other necessities for life. Apparently GoPro, which makes those cute little wonderful cameras, they're cutting 250 employees. Regis is closing 600 salons in Walmart. We mentioned that the other day. Unfortunately, too many American people believe the economy is improving despite the obvious signs to the contrary, and they're charging like crazy. They're maxing out their credit cards. Personal savings are in a decline. They're living totally on debt. And that's a bad thing. I was at the supermarket the other day watching people buying their groceries on a credit card. Not a debit card, a credit card. That's not healthy. That is not healthy. I think we need to get back to cash and carry. It's the way Claire and I live. Cash and carry. We want to have our money in our hands as cash. We want to pay for our food with cash. We want to pay for whatever with cash. It's simple. We know how much we've got. We don't go over our budget. Our budget is what we've got in the pocket for that day. When it's gone, it's gone. We stop buying. Right now, the median family net worth is below 1989 levels. The debt-to-money ratio for the average family is the worst since 1962. These are not good numbers. We're clearly an empire that is in decline. Now, there is a report coming out of government sources saying that the United States is going to pull out of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. And as a result of this report, both the loonie and the peso have dropped. It appears to be a knee-jerk response, but apparently Reuters has come on out saying that yes, the U.S. is going to get out of the North American Free Trade Agreement. I think that's a good idea, and that's because I'm a nationalist. I think there should be separate sovereign nations all over the globe with protected borders for the same reason that you have fireproof doors in a building and watertight bulkheads in a ship. I'm definitely an anti-globalist. I'm sure that's not a surprise to any of you there. But I think it would be a good idea to get out of NAFTA. Go back to just running this country for the benefit of this country. Right now, world debt is rising nearly 3 times as fast as total global wealth. Now, that is really out of control. Now, we understand that under the model of private central banking, by design, debt growth outpaces the money supply growth. But 3 times, that is a danger signal right there. And it may be because of too many failed business ventures, too much speculation, too much derivatives. But world debt is rising 3 times as fast as total global wealth. The fact of the matter is it can never be paid off. It ought to be just written off. If the money junkies would just let go of this idea that they're ever going to be able to collect all this debt, because they won't, just write it off, zero it out, and all the economies of all these nations would instantly revive. It would be an instant restart. It would be a global jubilee. Now, globally, there is a debt load of $291 trillion, and it raises the question of whether bond yields will rise this year. Everyone's always talking about bonds, government bonds, banker bonds, and so forth. Oh, it'll always rise, it'll always go up. I remember when I was a kid, the big thing was savings bonds. You bought savings bonds from the government, and they would always be expected to rise. Well, with this debt load that's saddling the entire globe, that may no longer be possible unless we get into hyperinflation. And unfortunately, sadly, that is always the last step before a collapse, is they'll try to inflate all debts away. We owe you this many $1 trillion. All right, let me crank up that printing press here. We'll just crank that. There's the $1 trillion. Go away and be happy. It's not really a solution, of course. It's a stopgap measure. Gold, however, is doing very well right now. All the metals are doing well, but specifically gold is basically at an all-time high when denominated in 8 major emerging market currencies. And it's actually seeing a stronger performance than when priced in the US dollar or the euro or the British pound. So hang on to your gold, hang on to your silver, hang on to your platinum, hang on to your tantalum. That's a commodity. It's an item with intrinsic value. And in a world of fiat paper currencies with no commodity base, anything with an intrinsic value becomes a storage of your wealth. Now, real estate has been in trouble. There's been another real estate bubble. There's been a rental bubble. We're talking about especially San Francisco. It's insane, the rents that are there. I mean, Claire and I are living here in Hawaii. We pay lower rent on our home than you would pay for an equivalent property in Los Angeles or San Francisco. It's just insane. And apparently, real estate prices, rental prices are now so high that people are taking steps to avoid it. They're getting roommates. Their millennials are staying with their parents into their 30s, and as a result, real estate is starting to wane. And that may be another bubble about to burst. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there's an interesting little article that came out of womensystems.com, and it points out that there are 2 issues covered in the story. First is that 15 states are economically failing big time. And we've been hearing it. We know how bad things are in Illinois. California is desperate for money. They're spending huge amounts on the illegal immigrants. They're not really getting revenues for things like water usage by Nestle. This welfare state isn't working on out because eventually the fatal flaw with the Democratic liberal platform is eventually they run out of other people's money to spend, and that's what's going on. But the other problem is that the modern educational system, which is more about indoctrination than education, is not actually preparing students to properly manage money. They're being educated to be obedient consumers, and that's drastically different from when I was in school, those many years ago, when we were taught basically to manage our money, to not buy things we didn't need, to have a savings account, to save for a rainy day. And that's all apparently vanished from the education system in order for retail corporations in general, to harvest more wealth from the people, to have them living perpetually in debt. When I was a kid, being in debt for anything other than your house and your car was considered a bad thing. People didn't use credit cards to buy their food, or even their clothes. Was cash and carry. But personal finance was considered a major subject of education, and not anymore, apparently. There we are. Now, the Trump administration has waived part of the punishment for 5 banks whose affiliates were convicted for manipulating global interest rates. One of the waivers of punishment was granted to Deutsche Bank, which is owed at least $130 million by President Donald Trump's business empire. It's also been fined for its role in a Russian money laundering scheme. So there's a black mark on President Trump right there, where he's basically given the bank that he owes money to a get-out-of-jail-free card. A lot of shady things going around Deutsche Bank. A lot of suspicious deaths, including somebody that I personally knew. Those bankers, they're not really the nice people that they'd like you to think they are. Not one tiny bit. All right. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, welcome back to our show. Hour number 2, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And the reason I'm laughing is I just saw this headline story. Over at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, apparently they've plugged in one too many computers or robots because they've had a power outage there. The whole show is currently blacked out. We're going to take a phone call now. We're going to go to Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Well, you've touched on a great subject matter here, the 15 states that are failing. You talked about this youth, this generation here that clearly is living beyond its means. And I run into these kids all the time who want it all. They want it right now, immediate gratification. And they understand that our fathers, our parents, actually took a long time to acquire the wealth that they have and the nice things that they have and the homes that they have and the cars they have, whatever they have, their belongings. But these kids nowadays, they want it now. It's immediate gratification. And that piece of plastic that they're handing out at the colleges there, you know, that starts that whole process off of buying things. Of course, they can't pay it off at the end of the month, and they just accumulate more debt. But you know, that is an interesting topic to talk about. That this generation is not, you know, they know how to earn some money maybe, but they don't know how to plan and save or budget at all. I'm not even sure where they even teach that. It should be taught at home by your parents to say you're living beyond your means, but evidently that's not working. These kids are getting themselves in financial debt, and they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and it is a trap. We see that with the college educational system, which has basically been turned into a racket to plunge these kids onto that debt hook with a promise of a high-paying job after college, which 9 times out of 10 turns out not to exist, and they're stuck with that college debt for decades. And it really is. I mean, this is what the bankers want. All of us in debt to the banks and working our entire lives and just giving them any of the wealth that we don't need to immediately live on. We're being driven back to basically a return to a feudal society. And it is a terrible thing, and the education system is failing these kids in terms of teaching them responsible handling of money. It's failing them in terms of not teaching them how to think critically and analytically. Education is basically all about indoctrination into being the kind of person that the corporations and the banks want them to be.
Yeah. I agree with your cash and carry philosophy. It's a great philosophy to have. If you have it, you can afford it, and you can pay for it right then, that's fine. Buying things on credit. If you want to keep a rule of thumb, that if you buy it on credit, you have to make sure you pay it off at the end of the month so you have a zero balance. And I don't think that's ever really been talked about or emphasized. It's like, don't worry about it, you know. But that thing creeps, you know, gets bigger and bigger, inflates every month. You don't pay it off. You just pay a a minimum on it, and that thing just swells. So that's a good rule of thumb, I think, personally. Cash and carry is the best way to go, but if you use a card, pay it off at the end of the month, have a zero balance. There you go.
Absolutely. But, you know, part of the problem is that there is a certain rush emotionally when you can whip out that plastic and just buy what your impulse is telling you to buy right at that moment. And retailers know about that. They organize the display in the store to push those impulse buys. You'll go into a store because you need to get a new blender, but right around the elevators and escalators and doors, there are all these other things that look really cool, and you say, oh, wouldn't that be lovely in my home? I can just whip out the plastic and buy it. Basically, shopping malls are gigantic Skinner boxes, which these companies actually hire psychologists to design their sales space to induce you to buy more than you really want to buy. And people need to be aware of that. If you're aware of it, it's less effective, but schools are failing to teach that as well.
Hey, thanks again, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over here now to Jeff in Toronto. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thank you very much for taking my call. The reason I'm calling is about DACA. And I was watching Tucker Carlson the other night. I just wanted to get your opinion on something. And the president was speaking with a bunch of different legislators there in the White House, one of which was Nancy Pelosi and other people. And I just wanted your opinion on, do you think there's going to be just a clean DACA bill before anything can happen on legislation? Because that seems a bit oxymoronic to me, because I don't think Donald Trump will have any leverage to actually have a real proper border wall. And the reason that I bring that up is because, you know, I live in Canada here, and we have our own problems with immigration too, or illegal immigration, and a lot of people are offended by the fact that the part of Canada where I live in is Ontario, who just brought in quite a large increase in the minimum wage. It's now $14 an hour, and I think that the more you raise the minimum wage, it does hurt business. But if you don't have those legals there, then that's the element that people don't remember so much, because a lot of the cheap labor that comes in the country, if you didn't have the minimum wage, then, and you didn't have illegal immigration, because I think that, no disrespect to anyone, but I think that kind of lowers the cost of labor there. So I was just wondering if you believed him, or was this just sort of a bargaining tactic in the media for Donald Trump to say that he just, or for whatever reason, saying he's going to have a clean DACA? Because it's totally confusing why he would say that on the media.
It is very confusing, and for him to be talking about DACA, it appears he's pulling back again from the rhetoric that we heard during the campaign of just closing the borders and having some control there. Now, I think there ought to be a minimum wage. I think it ought to actually be higher, and the reason for that is very simple. There has to be the ability, an environment where ordinary people can trade their labor and their skills for enough money to go on out and buy whatever they need to buy, to go to the shopping malls, to basically buy the retail goods. The more corporations try and crush the cost of labor, it may look good on their bottom line in the short term, but in the long term, they're going to lose customers. And it amazes me that economists don't really seem to see this. That if you don't have a working and middle class who are generating new wealth one way or the other, they're not going to be able to pour that wealth back into the economy. And if, let's say, a restaurant has a minimum wage and their labor costs have gone up, they'll raise prices on their food. But everybody in the community, if their wages and salaries have gone up as well, they can still continue to do business at the restaurant. They'll just pay a little bit more for the food, and the economy will start to improve. So that's one issue. The other one is, first of all, I don't think Trump's border wall is actually going to work. There will be tunnels. There will be other means that it will be bypassed. The walls haven't worked in the past. What will work is enforcing the existing laws under Title VIII. And that means anybody granting sanctuary to undocumented workers, anybody hiring undocumented workers, anybody giving aid or transportation to undocumented workers, they go to jail. You start doing that, and you will cut off the financial incentive for illegal immigration. Now, I don't know what the immigration laws are in Canada, but I do know that we have the laws here in the United States that would end the problem if we can get the political will to end it. But we have the Democrats who are counting on illegal immigrants to vote Democratic in elections. They want the borders wide open, and these Democratic voters to just pour on in for this November's elections in 2020. And the thing that struck me most about Trump's meeting with these legislators was the Republicans basically didn't seem to be there to support him. And it wasn't an issue about whether the Republicans want open borders or not. It's that the Republican Party sees Trump as an enemy. Last year, they lost control of the process. They weren't able to pick the candidate they wanted to run against Hillary Clinton. And so they're not going to really support Donald Trump in what he's trying to do.
No, I perfectly agree with you. And, the border laws here in Canada are not that dissimilar from the ones in the United States. But I do think that when you bring in thousands and thousands of refugees, most of which are from the third world, and let's just say you weren't necessarily considering having a minimum wage, bringing all these low-wage workers in, well, by itself, cut down on employers or the employees, prospective employees' right to make a proper wage, because you've sort of like watered down the labor market with low-wage workers. So I think that has to be taken into consideration too. And I think that's one of the reasons that Trump was thinking about a border wall. I would think that he'd be more logical-minded just to have men on the ground on the border there, as strange as that might sound. But
no, that can work. That's what Eisenhower did. That's what Eisenhower did in Operation Wetback. And he had only 10% of the staff of the current Immigration Customs Enforcement, and he absolutely shut down the illegal immigrants coming to the United States of America. They just went on out there, they caught them, they threw them back, and he enforced the laws regarding employment of undocumented workers. But you are absolutely right. When there's a surplus of workers, legal or illegal, when there's a surplus of refugees looking for work, then corporations get the attitude that they can treat their employees any way they want because there's always going to be somebody else standing there at the door asking for a job. It would be better for the American worker if there were more jobs than workers, and then they could negotiate higher pay and better benefits.
And another problem is, in my opinion, is that if you have an illegal person coming into the country, whether it be Canada, the United States, or anywhere else in the world who's from a Western country, and you have an illegal coming in from like a second or third world country, they may be very intimidated by pushing ahead against their employer, but and any abuses that go on in the workplace, which is also can be, so, there's that. So I think that the border wall, it's great in the campaign kind of thing, but I think that just having men on the ground and boots on the ground there would be much more logical to deal with. That doesn't matter if it's Canada or the United States. Now we have, when President Trump was bringing these remarks, not any policy matters, but just remarks about really strengthening the American immigration laws. We had a lot of Americans coming to Canada. This is going back a couple of months ago, and Justin Trudeau just gave them all refugee status. And these are people who are showing up. They weren't proper refugees. They're showing up with stem-type luggage and winding up in like hotels and whatnot. So it's just a bit of a joke, right? So I'm complaining in a way, but I'm also saying that it's also a bit.
Well, yeah, it is a major problem, and I think politicians are trying to look like they're addressing the issue, but in the end, we're not seeing anything actually being accomplished. And that is my major complaint. We still have the refugees coming in. We still have the illegal immigrants coming on in. And it's causing a tremendous amount of harm to all of these modern industrialized nations. And in a way, it's a form of theft because in the case of the United States of America, we, the Americans, generation after generation after generation, built this place. We made this country. We built the buildings, the railroads, and so forth and so on. And now we have politicians who basically want to give our heritage away to people from the third world in exchange for votes. And that's not really a very polite thing to do, to put it delicately.
That's a very polite way of putting it. But I'm just, it is. And it's easy to pick on someone who comes in the country. You don't know if they're legal or not, but all I'm saying is that it does, I think we're both half right. But the thing is, having a minimum wage degree, you need to have some, because we used to have back in the early 1900s, child exploitation and children dying and workplace hazards, which would kill people, and those, thank God those days are gone. And there's a place in the world for unions, but all I'm saying is that there's also a place for something called citizenship and having a value in life and that meaning something.
Yeah, well, that's something that's missing from the American culture right now, unfortunately. Another failure of our educational system. But you're absolutely right. When there is a huge surplus of workers, there are going to be abuses by employers. And let me take the example of Hollywood, since Hollywood sexual abuse and everything is in the news. The reason there's so much of that is because in Hollywood, there are literally thousands of people for every one actual job that's available. And that's why people like Harvey Weinstein feel they can get away with what they do. If this girl's not willing to go along with this kind of stuff, fine, she's out the door and we'll see the next one that's waiting in line. And when you get a country that is operating the same way, where there are so many workers and so few jobs, you're going to start seeing people in other industries behaving exactly the same way.
If only that people can remember like when President Eisenhower brought in that program that you spoke about earlier about the, Operation Wetback or whatever, that actually worked. And it doesn't take several billions of dollars, but also it shouldn't be like what the liberals are doing these days, saying, oh, you're racist for wanting to bring this in. No, it's not about racism because legal people and they should come in. But, I mean, it's just about national sovereignty and respecting about, your citizenship. So if you're not willing to stand up for that, then you're, like, denying your own citizenship by not speaking up against things that are like that. That's all my own point.
Well, basically, illegal is not a race. And that is the issue. They're illegal. Now, a responsible immigration policy is that people apply to come here. They're staying in their home country first. They don't come here and sit around and wait. They apply for citizenship or entry from their home country. And they are basically looked at. Are these good people? Are they productive? Do they have skills that will be a contributing benefit to our economy? And if the answer is yes, they are allowed on in. But this total open border policy we have right now, we're getting all kinds of people who are a detriment to society, including gang members. MS-13 is just exploding across this country because the MS-13 gang members are just walking across that border and nobody's there to try and stop them. And they're bringing in crime, more drug trafficking, all kinds of things. We're seeing it in Europe with the refugee crisis. Out-of-control crime in France and Germany and Sweden, and it's happening here. And it's tolerated because it's seen as a necessary evil along the path to a one-world government.
And it's also on the other end to that coin is like you're racist if you speak out against it. You just can't even have an argument against it. Otherwise, you have to feel like you have to take a shower after that because you're being socially engineered to think that you're a horrible person for having an opinion that deviates from that. So it's hard to win there.
Yeah, it is. But I'll tell you,
time of your family without being,
Yeah, there are two things I can't stand in this world: racism and Irishmen on the beach. Or
people that don't think critically. Thank you very much time.
All right, Jeff, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network, and we're going to switch over to Nick in England. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hello, Mike. Hi. Greetings from England. I've been amusing myself for the last couple of days reading through the lawsuit that was just filed by a senior software engineer from Google against Google. I don't know whether you've mentioned it on the program.
Not yet.
Very much. Okay. I mean, I knew that it would get my blood boiling. I mean, I was kind of had this sort of vicarious pleasure looking forward to reading it. But I've got to say, I've just been stunned, just completely stunned by this document. The story's quite well known. I mean, this guy James Damore, he got fired in August, basically fundamentally for the crime of being a white male, with conservative views, and he was basically became apparent that to get promoted, you've got to go to lots of diversity training, and Google takes a very aggressive and proactive stance to this, to the point where apparently, according to this document, you go to internal meetings, and if teams of groups have more than 50% women, everyone applauds, and if you don't, if it's got rather too many white males, boos ring out around the room.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to have to put you on hold. We've got to take a break for commercial. Do not hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after the commercials because I really want to hear more about this. We'll be right back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking here with Nick in England. We're talking about the Google lawsuit. Google is notorious for being a liberal bastion. So kindly pick up your story where you left off.
Mike, I've got to be honest, I don't even know where to start. This whole thing is a freak show. It's just beyond satire. I find it's just extraordinary. There've been meetings in Google where if the teams have more than 50% women, people would applaud, and there would be boos ringing out if a team was too many white, Caucasian males. And this chap, James Damore, he wrote because it was very clear that in order to get promoted, you had to go to attend various diversity trainings and meetings and so on. So this is a career move that you have to do, and Google employees were encouraged to give their feedback and so on. And so he initially gave his feedback in a very measured way. I mean, this chap was a senior software engineer. He was a chess master. A highly analytically trained guy. He's not some hysterical person at all. And he was just writing, certain things about, men and women, they're different. Maybe there's fewer female software engineers because of interests, and how can we rectify this, and so on. I mean, he certainly wasn't saying, women are bad software engineers. Far from it. The whole tone was just measured and taking an approach to analyze these things. But of course, it went against the entire philosophy of the social justice warrior kind of left-wing groupthink that they have there. And it got to the point where even people who were arguing against him would be paid bonuses, for goodness sake. And then when he complained about harassment, it was a case of shoot the messenger, and he was sent home to work from home for a few days instead of actually bringing any action against these people that were harassing him. And I've just gone through this litany of things in the lawsuit where comments from senior people at Google saying things like, I don't want people, i.e. people with conservative views, to feel safe here, to share those views. And then there was one of the co-plaintiffs was in one of these meetings was talking about, well, what are you supposed to do if you're a white man and you want to just question some of these things? And the answer is basically you have to accept this frame of systematic bias. In other words, you have to accept this left-wing identity politics view of the world, that there is systematic violence, and that is the starting point for the conversation. To which he wrote something along the lines of, if you think Trump is a Nazi and wants to hurt gays and women and disabled people, then you're so badly out of touch that you're bordering on the delusional. And of course, this guy got sacked ultimately, and there was just this constant barrage of harassment, verging on the violence, and you can just see it's just a cult from start to finish. And what I find, one of the paradoxes I see in this is that you'd think that somebody who's a software engineer, this is, and what Google does, is a very highly analytical job and profession. This isn't a sort of wishy-washy kind of thing. This is the height of rational thinking. And the whole organization around it is just this, what he calls this echo chamber, ideological echo chamber, where there's just this distorted bubble of groupthink. And what I find, there's an arrogance in there that I just find breathtaking, that I can't really understand. But the fact that, okay, Google might want to be taking over the world and so on, but how on earth can you treat people that way and deal with, and be so fundamentally and profoundly prejudiced is just, my mind just can't understand it.
Well, you would almost think that an organization like Google, which is involved in all this high-level software development, would be functioning as a meritocracy, which is where the best qualified person gets the job regardless of gender, bias, orientation, race, creed, color, and so forth. And following these policies of, quota-based hiring and promotion, they're actually undermining their own ability to do what it is they do. But unfortunately, meritocracy has become a dirty word in this country. In fact, apparently there's this math professor who came on out and said that meritocracy is a tool of whiteness, that only white people believe in meritocracy, that the most qualified should get the jobs. And everybody else just says that, we're going to hire these positions based on so many of this color, so many of this gender, and somehow we'll get the business done anyway. That doesn't always work out. Okay, we're going to have to take another break for commercials. Nick, stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you after these few words. We'll be Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Nick in England about the lawsuit filed against Google by former Google engineer James Damore. A very interesting comment. Apparently, Google defines diversity as women or individuals who are not Caucasian or Asian. So even the Asians are feeling the pressure on this. The problem I have with all of this, of course, this abandonment of meritocracy, is it sends a message to younger people they don't need to study hard in school because they're going to get hired on a quota basis. And that means the overall quality of American students, the labor pool, is in decline. This is one of the reasons why there are so many H-1B visas out there, because corporations need to find people who actually know how to get some of this high-tech work done, and they have to seek people in other countries because of this poison of political correctness that has spread through our society. Anyway, Nick, do you have more comments on this?
Well, yeah, just a couple of very quick things. I mean, if I was running a law firm or something, I'd want to recruit the best lawyers, because if I didn't, my firm wouldn't cut it against the competitors. And I thought America was supposed to be a capitalist society. I just simply, I don't get it. And I think that Google has a kind of monopoly at the moment. And I really think that, how dare they think they can treat people in this way? They have no concept of law. To just go around nakedly discriminating against people is so wrong, and I think they deserve to be punished. I really do. How on earth can they think they're so important, they rule the world, that the rule of law doesn't apply to them? I think it's shocking. I really do. I think that the justice or somebody should take a hatchet job to them and just, they can't be allowed to get away with this nonsense.
No, I'm absolutely in agreement. I'm in agreement. You're right. It's groupthink. It's a cult mentality. And in telling this James Damore that he couldn't express his conservative views, that's a violation of his First Amendment rights right there. And so I hope he succeeds with the lawsuit. And I keep going back to that movie, The Interns, which was shot on the campus at Google, and they basically portrayed Google as this wonderful place to work. But I keep hearing from other people who've been there, who used to work there, that no, it is not. That it's a very closed-minded place to work, that the top management is all caught up in political correctness and social justice warrior, and because they are effectively the leading company in what they do, that they're imposing this on their workforce. Of course, there have been suspicions that Google has been tied in with U.S. intelligence all the way back to its very founding. And so maybe they're being told to basically get their staff hooked on the social justice warrior political correctness bandwagon, as it were, as part of a larger plan to try and get everybody in the United States thinking this way.
I just very quickly, to me, there's a decadence in that. I mean, I know you've mentioned a couple of times the parallels of ancient Rome and the fall of Rome. But I mean, when I look at it, to me, it's just decadent from top to bottom. I've got to the point I can't even look at the Google page anymore. I mean, I know you don't use it, but I'm going to stop using it because I can't condone this on any level. It disgusts me. I
agree. I wholeheartedly agree. And this actually goes back to what I was saying earlier to another one of the callers. When you have a surplus of workers for very few jobs, employers start to think that they can get away with anything. I remember years ago when I was still working in the computer animation visual effects business, and I applied for a job over at Disney, and their salary or their pay offering was way below what I'd been getting at other studios. And I was told point blank, we're Disney. People are going to work here for less money because they want to put it on their resume. And I said, I'm not one of those, thank you very much. And I walked out of the office.
Oh, well, I'm going to watch this case with great interest. I think, to me, symbolically, in the culture war that we're in, it's a fascinating case. I really think it really cuts to the core of a lot of the nonsense that's going on out there. So that's all I had for you today.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And, yes, I'm going to be looking at this lawsuit as well because this whole political correctness, social justice warrior thing has gone way too far. And the idea that they think meritocracy is now bad, that is destructive of education. It's destructive of our industries. It's destructive of our economy. And it needs to stop. If I have to go into the hospital, I want the doctor who got all A's in medical school operating on me, not somebody who was given a scalpel just because they were non-white or a woman. If I'm flying in an airplane, I want to have a pilot up front there who got all A's in all of his college classes and flight school. I don't want somebody who's at the controls of the airplane just because they fit a minority quota. That's just common sense. Okay, we're going to switch over to John in Tennessee. John, thank you for waiting so patiently all this time, and what is on your mind?
Well, we're suffering under global warming. It's 62 degrees here today.
Oh, okay. Well, it's 82 here.
It'll be snowing on Friday, so. Well, we have another freak show. It's a great follow-up to what Nick was talking about. Another freak show coming out of the Silicon Valley. Did you hear about the latest Project Veritas finding?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. We were going to talk about that later in the show, but do enlighten us.
Yeah, well, Michael O'Keefe did his first public interview since releasing what he did yesterday on the Michael Savage Show, and obviously everybody knows how big his audience is, and they just went on to foment all this moral outrage that they've got to... Now, this guy, the first guy in the videotape, he is a... what is he? He's a software security engineer. He's a small person, and he hates Trump. And Project Veritas sent either a half a dozen or a dozen people into Twitter and got these people to start talking and say something to the effect of they'd be happy to take Trump's direct messages or deleted tweets and give them over to Robert Mueller's DOJ. And the thing, I think this is a big nothing burger because James O'Keefe even admitted that there's no illegal activity here.
Yes.
I'm sure Twitter's covered themselves in their terms of service going, once you put it on our platform, we own it, just like Facebook owns all the pictures I try to share with the grandparents. So I'm sure they're covered, and now James O'Keefe is going to get sued because Twitter's going to be like, I mean, the guy who admitted he hates Trump and he would do all this stuff with the direct messages, it's not like when he sees a video of himself, he doesn't remember who he's talking to. So they're going to find these little Project Veritas people. These people are going to be, they might get Seth Riched. I mean, you know, and so these people go out looking for trouble and they find it. So James O'Keefe's going to get sued to death by Twitter. There's no expectation of privacy. I'm sure Trump already knows this too. I mean, you know, Twitter's a great platform. It's a great soapbox. It gets news out there, but there can't be any expectation of privacy. And if he's got his enemies are over there at Twitter, it's like O'Keefe and Savage. I mean, Savage was just, he was over the top defending Trump, you know, but it gets ridiculous. It's not like you level a mild criticism or a right criticism against Trump. We don't call you pro-Hillary, you know, so Savage is just dividing people with this, and he wants heads on the chopping block from Twitter. He's not going to get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I understand,
because
but you're absolutely...
it's immoral. Yeah, it's immoral if they take Trump's deleted tweets or direct messages between him and his son, right? I mean, give it to Robert Mueller. You think Trump is dumb enough to say something in a direct message that would indict himself? I mean, you know.
Yeah, I don't know that any of that would really be admissible. And you're right, Trump is smart enough not to use social media to talk about something. Certainly not Twitter. He'd use a direct text message, cell phone to cell phone, and even that's not private. I mean, the rule of thumb today is there is no expectation of privacy on the Internet at all unless you're using your own encryption system, such as I came up with in my challenge to the NSA. But it is another reminder. So corporate social media is not social. They have their biases. They are imposing those biases on their end users. And that's something that people have to take into account.
And now what James O'Keefe is saying is, like I said, this is his first interview. These are the first videos, the first audio clips. He's going to be releasing more of this in the next week or 10 days. But I mean, for him to send all those guys in with the private cameras like they did with Planned Parenthood, I mean, they were talking about the California law, whether or not you could record somebody. Is it illegal? He's just going to get ruined for sending those people in there with their cameras, and everybody's going to try to bash Twitter. But like I said, legally, Twitter didn't do anything wrong. Twitter has, like you said, they have their liberal bias, so they're going to do whatever they can to, quote-unquote, take down Trump. But, Sean Hannity, night after night after night, just bashing Hillary, the woman's never going to get indicted, ever. You know what I mean? So that's the reality. So I want our listeners to, again, separate and not get on the Michael Savage bandwagon going, what do you guys, this is a big nothing burger. It really is.
If I recall correctly, California is what is called a single consent state for recording, whether it's an audio or a video, where one of the parties present has to know there's a recording going on. And some states are zero consent.
Well, what about somebody can overhear the conversation? Did you hear that? If there's another party there who can overhear the conversation, then it's not illegal to record.
That would certainly have a bearing on the court. James O'Keefe has been in this business long enough where I'm pretty sure that he checked to make sure that he was going to be on safe legal ground before going into Twitter. But again, the fact that Twitter basically came out and made the offer of sharing these direct messages with the Mueller investigation, that tells you right there that there is a bias in the ownership.
Yeah, and the girl that was talking to this software security engineer, she got him laughing. They were all chumly together, and then he called Trump all sides of assorted names like idiot and moron and all this other stuff to show his bias. But then he was just chuckling, and she helped him along. She was a very good actress, but like, yeah, I'd be happy to share this stuff with Mueller's DOJ, which would prolong this stupid witch hunt, which is, again, going nowhere, you know. So, I mean, it's something else to watch, but freak show was a great word used by Nick. This, with the Silicon Valley stuff, it's a freak show. You know, like you just said, we know what these companies are, we know what their bias is, and we know that they can corner all of their employees. You want to work at Google? Then you'll do as we say, right?
Or Twitter or any of these companies. I mean, we know the employment situation in Silicon Valley is very dire. It's very expensive to live there. There are people who are working at places like Google who can't even afford rent. They're literally living in their cars in order to work at Google. And so I imagine if you actually have a job at one of these places, you start to feel pretty good about yourself and your ego can get away with you, that you're somehow above the common clay of society and the rules don't apply anymore. By the way, we just found that video. Actually, somebody just sent it to me, and we just put it up at whatreallyhappened.com.
Okay, and Savage also did say that some of the people that we'll see in later videos are probably some of those visa people that were brought over here to work. They have no sense of democracy whatsoever, so they could care less what they do with people's information. But like I said, it's not private once you put it on Twitter. There's no expectation of privacy. So
no, absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody who thinks the Internet has any privacy, and unfortunately a lot of young people have been harmed by putting up very personal information or even worse, photos onto the web, thinking that only their friends are going to see it, and it winds up getting into the hands of other people who will then use that information against them. That's something that parents really ought to impress on young people just getting onto the computer. You know, it's not your friend, it's not private, you're basically stepping outside the house when you touch that keyboard, act accordingly.
Well, and if anybody just picks up a cell phone in a high school and records a fight, you know the police will find out exactly where they came from once they put it on social media. They'll go right through the ISP, right through whatever it is, and they'll find the person in a matter of a couple hours. So everything's getting tracked on that Internet.
I wish they could track down all the cyber criminals that easily.
Yeah. All right, Mike. Well, have a good show, buddy.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Mark in Philadelphia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, on the subject of the workers and all that, I see that the H-1B visa program is being addressed by Trump and not extending re-extending their stay. And then you find out the detail of that many of them have extended it many times. And on the subject matter, these are the young kids that are working for these companies, and they come over here, and to me, they're given the front of the line privileges and high status. And boy, if you come from a place like India and where it's poor, and you come over here and you're making the big bucks, boy, that's an ego trip right there waiting to happen.
Yes.
And I see these kids. I see them here in Philadelphia. You know why? Because we have a school here. Maybe you've heard, University of Pennsylvania. That would be the Ivy League school, which costs like $80,000 a year to attend. You walk through the campus, and I've done that many times in the last several months. And I walked through the campus when they were starting classes, and I saw these groups of kids, and I was like, wow. But what I noticed was they're either all from India or China. Nary did I see a white person like myself. And that kind of bothered me. You know why? Because what's the deal? Are they that smart? Oh, that's right. We're told that they're so much smarter than we are. That's a crock of crap. We Americans we're very ingenious, we're very diligent, and we are smart too.
I think you're confusing. I think you're confusing.
I see it as a war. I see it as a military strategy.
Hang on.
A military strategy and tactics.
Mark, give me a second here. I think you're confusing IQ with education. And yes, I agree that Americans are just as intelligent overall as any other group on planet Earth. The question is, are we as well educated in applicable skills? And the answer there is no. because our education system has let our young people down. It's gone from education to indoctrination. Common Core is teaching little more than obedience to authority, belief in global warming, and various other platforms of the liberal agenda. So these kids are graduating school here in the United States without the skills that employers are looking for. And I think that's a big reason for the H-1B visas.
Well, yeah, but...
okay, we got to take a break for commercials, Mark. Mark, stay on the line. Stay on the line. Going to come right back to you after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Mark in Philadelphia about immigration and the H-1B visas. Again, I'd like to see that program end. I'd like to see companies hiring American people. But at least part of the issue, along with the fact that the H-1B visas expect lower pay, is the fact that our education system has really let our young people down. And a lot of them are not getting trained in skills that are in demand by employers. And that's why the employers say we have to go to these other countries like India and China, where the people are graduating school fully up to date on these technical skills needed for these jobs.
Well, I would say to that is that by happenstance or is that by design? I tend to think, as the research I've done, it's by design. It's that, maybe you've heard of it, problem, reaction, solution.
The Hegelian dialectic.
Well, lo and behold, there's a corporation or corporations that just ride in on the white horse with the solution, right? Now they're going to charge a fee for that. That would be a censure. They made a sweetheart deal with the Gupta of the Indians, donated to the Clinton Foundation, right?
Yes.
And they got the rubber stamp to bring a bunch of Indians over. Many of them weren't even qualified, although they were supposed to be qualified. I'm telling you, they're coming even if they're not qualified, Mike. So they come over, and then who do they work for? They work for companies like Accenture. Now, I get that information from Art in Philly, and he's an engineer himself, and he's been displaced by these very people. So this comes from frontline people who are my elder and who are in the know of this. So then the Accenture then subcontracts to who? They subcontract to the government, and they get all kinds of contractual agreements with the government. So they're making money on both ends, and they're making a killing. Okay, and for the bigger picture is to take down America. So you take down America financially, and then what do? Then you import, let's see, a drug that doesn't even grow in North America. That would be heroin. And you destroy the family unit through opioids and heroin. And there you go. That's the ultimate. Just take us down, and then they can easily come in and take over. And they've got these workers who are in a high-tech industry, beholden to them to do whatever they want, and they have no care or concern about the Constitution or the freedoms that our forefounders and our forefathers fought for, suffered for, and died for. Mm-hmm. So, but they're ready to willing to make that big money and drive a Jaguar, which is also owned by. That's right.
Okay.
So anyway, I think you get what I'm saying, but I really appreciate the guy across the pond, Englishman. He's really keen on this, and it's not by happenstance. This is by design. So there you go. That's all I have to say about that.
All right, Mark, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. I'm not sure that I see the connection between the H-1B visas and a deliberate plan to take down the United States. I think the issue is the United States is in decline for a wide variety of reasons, economic mismanagement, too many wars, which, by the way, were factors in the decline and fall of the Soviet Union. I think the problem is they can't stop it from happening. They're trying to delay it as hard as they can. I don't think they can stop it. Okay, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're coming up on a station identification, and we'll be back with hour number 3, talking more about immigration in Europe, various science topics. So do join us on the air, and we will get this show done and be back just as soon as possible. So stay tuned. We're going to have a few words from our sponsors, and we'll be back after that. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to take a phone call from Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mike, yes. That last caller brought up a lot of good points, what's happening to the white majority in this country. And what I would like to just talk about a little bit, if you allow me, is the abuse that's going on with this so-called affirmative action, minority, small business, business certification. Now, what that is specific programs from the federal and a lot of state programs that certify businesses to become women minority-owned.
Yes.
Now, for an example, right, now we were brought up, I'm the same age as you, we were brought up to judge on content and character, not on color or skin. This program specifically is a race-specific program to give an unfair advantage to minorities and women-owned businesses. And I'll give you a perfect example of how it's being abused by people from India and China. A company like Microsoft hires an HB1 visa from India or China or Vietnam or one of these other countries. They come to the United States. 2 years they become citizens, or if they just become permanent residents. They go and apply to get a women minority-owned certification business certificate, and that is the key that unlocks the door to everything you can think of to help your business, from tax credits to loans to grants, you name it. This is what these folks get. Now, if I want to start a company, and I had all those tax credits and stuff coming in, of course I want to have an unfair advantage over somebody that's starting to put out the business certification for minorities and women. Mm-hmm. This is what's been going on. So next time you stop at the Dunkin' Donuts and you see a bunch of Indians are working it, or 7-Eleven, you see people from Middle East working it, it's because they have access to loans and grants and tax credits that the average American white guy isn't. And the program is only directed against the white male, because a woman can have this certification, and a minority in a subgroup, which includes Africans, people from the Middle East, people from Asia, sub-Asia, everybody but the white males left out of that. So if you wonder why white males feel a lot of anger, this is one of the reasons why. Because like I said before, Mike, when we were brought up, we were to judge on content or character, but it's not. Our government judges us specifically on color or skin and where you come from, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people are rankled over.
Well, originally when affirmative action was started up, it was supposed to guarantee equality of opportunity, but that's very hard to determine and very hard to enforce. So instead, they settled on the politically expedient path of mandating equality of outcome, and that's where all this quota-based hiring and everything came from. But the system you're talking about actually can be gamed, and I know that because I have a friend who has a business, and he put 51% of the company's ownership in the name of his wife. So he also qualified for this women-owned business for the credits and grants and loans and everything, but it's basically his business, and his wife actually does very little for it. So there's a workaround for that, and the more of these programs they have, the more people are going to find ways to get around it as well. So it's not as ironclad as you thought. But you're absolutely right. There is clearly an anti-white heterosexual male bias in our society today, and I find it highly offensive because in the long run, you don't cure racism by being racist, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to go for a system that is racist in reverse, supposedly for crimes that happened before any of our current generation was born.
Well, you're right. I can understand with the African race, they were enslaved and you give them a help. But since when do we enslave people from China or India? These people are getting the advantage because they got that certification that allows them. They get all kinds of tax credits, grants, loans, low interest rate loans, near zero interest rate loans. I mean, it's being gamed, and I think it needs to end. I think we should all be given a fair start,
yes,
and take it from there.
I agree.
But,
the playing field ought to be level.
Advantage.
The playing field ought to be level, and it is not. The table is definitely tilted against indigenous Americans.
Then if you speak out, you're an angry white male. I mean,
that's
ridiculous.
that's the thing. Oh, you're an
angry
angry white male. Well, not at my age. I'm sort of white male, and I'm getting bored with all of this stuff. All right, Frank, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open again. Yesterday, one of the callers called in and asked about the latest Tom Cruise movie, American Made, and Claire and I did watch it last night. And it does come up very short in terms of what is known about what was really going on in Mena, Arkansas, about Iran-Contra. First of all, from a filmmaking point of view, I found the editing very, very choppy, and it made it actually harder to follow what was going on. The gist of the movie is they portrayed Barry Seal as doing the drug thing all on his own, and it was tolerated by the CIA rather than the CIA participating in the drug running itself. So that was probably the first of the big lies. The film briefly makes reference to Reagan and Bush, but as the caller pointed out, no mention at all of the Clintons, because Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas when all of this was going on out of that airport at Mena. So the film is fun to watch, but it is by no means a portrayal of history. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the show. Getting on over to Europe, pardon me, Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, is upping the ante, upping the war of words and the rhetoric regarding the migrant crisis, saying that he doesn't see all these Muslims pouring into Hungary as refugees. He sees them as invaders, outright invaders. And apparently in an interview in the German newspaper Bild, Viktor Orban called the migrant crisis an invasion. And a lot of people in Europe are feeling that way. One of the reasons for that is that many of these migrants are young men of military age. And it has caused quite a bit of consternation, especially when people are seeing the crime wave that the refugee open borders policy has brought with it. Speaking about filmmaking, we were talking about American Made here. One of the stories that has come out of the Bundy case, now that it's been thrown out of court with prejudice, the Bundys are free, and a lot of people are looking back at what was going on. And it turned out one of the things the FBI did, trying to find evidence that they could bring against the Bundys, they actually set up a fake documentary film crew. And they basically went around to everybody in the case, family members, and said, we're doing a documentary about the Bundy case. Please talk to us on camera. And then they would ask provocative questions, trying to elicit a response that would provide information for the FBI. Very sneaky people, these FBI. And it was just a plot. It's a plot to try and build the criminal cases against the Bundys and their supporters. So not everybody with a camera and a lens is your friend here. Now, over in Las Vegas, there is a Metro Police Department captain who disappeared on December 21st. Nobody knows where he went. But it turns out it's the same police captain that introduced the city's new ShotSpotter gunshot detection program last October, just 2 weeks after the Harvest Festival massacre. Now, we don't know if there's a tie-in there. Basically, what ShotSpotter does is they have microphones that are set up all over the city. And it will hear a gunshot, and they will take the gunshot impulse from multiple microphones. They're very precisely timed, so they can triangulate, based on the speed of sound, where the shooting actually happened. So this police captain set this system up after the Mandalay Bay Hotel shooting, and then he's just disappeared. And that's a little bit mysterious. A lot of strange vanishings and suicides going on here. Meanwhile, over in New York, the New York Police Union has filed a lawsuit to stop the release of police body camera videos. And the idea is that the union is claiming police body cam videos should be protected, shielded from the public in the same way that performance evaluations and disciplinary actions are. In other words, you have no right to know what's going on. So if you've had an unfortunate altercation with the New York police, you will have to go to court to try and obtain that video, which sort of undermines the whole point of having those cameras on the police to begin with. Over in Los Angeles, there's an ongoing battle over the potential use of drones by the Los Angeles Police Department. And a lot of people are very concerned about police spying on people with these drones in inappropriate circumstances. And I know that was an issue when the police started running regular helicopter patrols over the city. Claire and I were living in Los Angeles while that was going on. And yes, there were times where the helicopters would come down and shine that light through our bedroom window. And so it really is an issue. And if you've seen the movie Blue Thunder, you'll understand some of the concerns were being raised even back then on that film. So the police have already approved a purchase of more drones and an officer training program, but the public debate is still going on. And the police are saying any drone deployment would only be for extreme circumstances, but the public are concerned about the potential for abuse of peeking through windows just for the heck of it. And it's a legitimate concern. It's a legitimate concern for all drones. And I would hope that in order to preserve our freedom to play with our little toys, that owners of private drones would show a little bit of citizenship and not abuse them, because it's only going to take a few incidents to find these things outlawed. I mean, you're already having to license and register the larger drones, and they are very useful. I've been noticing more and more on TV shows the aerial shots are all being used by drones. 2 years ago at our local fun fair here in the city of Aiea, there was somebody there who was shooting the fun fair grounds with a prosumer quality camera drone, and it got good video, very stable, much less expensive than trying to do a helicopter shot, much less disturbance from the downwash from the rotor of a helicopter. I'd hate to see those things being banned. Now, Monsanto is once again trying to create a climate in which you don't know whether the food you are eating is GMO or not. And at a recent Codex meeting in Berlin, Monsanto led an attempt to redefine genetically engineered food ingredients under the label of biofortified, so that consumers wouldn't know that if the label said biofortified, what it really meant was genetically engineered. Now, this contravenes the original Codex mandate for defining biofortification. That definition is based on improving the nutritional quality of food crops through conventional plant breeding, not genetic engineering, with the aim of making the nutrients bioavailable after digestion. That would be a good thing. Monsanto wants to hijack that designation and use it to basically hide the presence of genetically modified ingredients in food. So they're not giving up on that one at all. I continue to be very concerned about genetic engineering in the way that it seems to have been very recklessly deployed into the marketplace with inadequate testing. And we already know there have been some issues with it. Some are fairly benign. The Roundup Ready corn, for example, they found out unexpectedly the corn stalks are much more rigid and stiff than the natural variety of corn, and the farmers have to buy Kevlar belted tires for their tractors, or the tire tractors will get punctured when they're basically plowing for a new crop. And part of the problem is that these genetic corporations, these labs, they're not looking for unexpected side effects. They'll basically take an organism, they'll shove their custom designer genes in there, test to see if they're getting the desired effect, and that's it. It goes to market. I am still wondering if Morgellons disease was actually a horrendous mistake with GMO, because a report I saw about Morgellons disease said somebody had tested the fibers growing out of people's skin and found plant DNA. Now, there is no reason plant DNA should be inside a human. So there's an area of concern, and I'm sure there will be absolutely no funding to verify this theory or not. We've been talking about this nasty flu. I'm still on the tail end of it. Claire's still on the tail end of it. I have to take her back to the doctors this afternoon. But apparently this one came out of nowhere. It caught everyone by surprise. And we're already starting to see the corporate media trying to play this thing about, don't get freaked out about it. Story coming out of the Boston Globe is saying that, yeah, this is going to be nasty, but it's not going to be all that bad. Now, this contradicts stories that we are seeing in other sources, like Web News Sys, and apparently this flu now has a name. It's called the Aussie flu. Its CDC designation is H3N2. It's an aggressive strain of influenza A. And apparently it did emerge in Australia. It just hit everybody down there. And they're admitting in this article this H3N2 strain is not covered in the current vaccine. So you need to be careful. And I'm mentioning this only because of the fact, don't be a hero. Don't think you're tougher than this is. If you start feeling sick and you start running a fever, you get to your care practitioner. Especially if now they're saying that it affects the elderly more than the young. A week ago they were saying exactly the opposite. All right, let's take a phone call. Stephen in Norway. Aloha, Stephen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Thank you for a nice program. I'm listening from Norway quite a lot.
Oh, well, thank you.
Lately we have been a little bit disturbed here in Norway because there is a troop of U.S. Marines stationed here a little bit outside of the regular stuff, and everybody's wondering why they are here now and what they are doing specifically, because they have some special training, of course. So they are here to implement something, and nobody really gets to know what it is. But then they have a general, Robert Neller, who's been visiting for Christmas and giving a speech to his men. And part of that speech, of course, went into local newspapers. And now it's all over Norway, this newspaper story about the American general talking to his men, newly stationed in Norway, to implement some new technology, asking them now to be prepared for a big-ass fight.
Yes, I remember reading about that myself, and it did upset a lot of people, why he would be over there in Norway. And I think the obvious answer is that the U.S. is still thinking that there's going to be a direct confrontation with Russia at some point in the future, and this is just part of the continuing buildup of weapons and troops with which to threaten Russia.
Yes, it looks like they have been including the northern part, the northern border of Russia also in the mobilization of what was supposed to be a rocket shield towards Iran 10, 15 years ago.
Yes.
And now this rocket shield is from Turkey all the way up through Ukraine and the Baltics, and now also in the Nordic countries, apparently starting some big plan about a 50-minute war with Russia with a massive missile attack, you know, and nobody really likes this thing, and Putin is out there warning the journalists. And today there was a press conference at the White House.
Stephen, I'm sorry to cut you off. We need to take a commercial break. Stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you after these words from our sponsors.
Thank you.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Stephen in Norway about the deployment of a detachment of Marines and some new technology. And apparently this general made a speech to these Marines basically saying, get ready for a big-ass conflict. And it's alarmed a lot of people. And I remember reading about this when it happened. And obviously the only really big conflict that they are going to be talking about is NATO against Russia, which is going to be a bad idea for everybody. It's going to tear up the landscaping. It's going to end tourism. Anyway, Stephen, what else do you have to share with us?
No, I was just, I mean, everything else become kind of unimportant when you think about this possibility. And Mr. Robert Neller, General, is also a part of Joint Chief of Staff, so he's really in the central organs of the Pentagon and, of course, of NATO. And, of course, he knows what he's talking about. And when he's forewarning his men about the quality of job expected from them, etc., and the awareness expected from them, we understand that something is real, is going on. Yes. This is no fun shop. This is not for exercise and leisure or to test something for another day. No, this is something really well planned, and it's been going on for a long time, and it's part of a big, big setup for a D-Day that seems to be coming now in November 2018, you know, if you have to listen to what they produced from the war scenario room in Pentagon 2011 already.
Yes.
That in the future we can deal with the Russian in one blow, we can eradicate the Russian military systems and take it all over, but we have to do it before they grow too strong. That was 2022. So the ideal time is like 2018, 1920. And the first pick there is 2018, unfortunately. And we're running kind of short of time, so I was thinking maybe better to question this thing than not.
No, I agree with you absolutely. And again, from the point of view of the United States government, they are committed to this war policy. They've been doing this for 17 years now. They can't just stop. They can't turn around and say, bad idea, and go back. The U.S. economy would immediately implode because countries would drop the U.S. dollar without that fear of the military. And so it does appear that we're headed toward an eventual war with Russia. Paul Craig Roberts, a while back, was saying that he was hearing people inside Washington, D.C. openly talking about just an unprovoked first nuclear strike against Russia's military assets. And obviously they would want those missiles...
Preemptive, yeah?
Yeah, not preemptive. Just haul off and nuke them. Because, you know, Russia's not...
Yeah, calling it preemptive, you know, it's the change of doctrine under Obama 2009 made preemptive possible. So what's preemptive? That's anything you want to be.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, they're saying preemptive...
the general can assess the situation, sorry.
Yeah, they're saying the word preemptive to make it look like it was necessary and it was the other guy's fault. We know that's an absolute lie. Putin is not coming to invade Europe. He's not coming to invade the United States of America. Both Europe and the United States are basically wrecked. Their economies are a disaster. They're flooded with refugees. Putin has enough problems to deal with in Russia. He doesn't have any ambitions of expanding into Europe right now. In fact, if you look at what's been going on...
It would be just another Libya, you know,
NATO, Mike. It's NATO is expanding eastward toward Russia, even though promises were made following the fall of the Soviet Union that NATO would basically go no further than the border of Germany. And NATO has not kept that promise. Again, look at the map, look at the timeline, you will see who the real aggressor is.
Yes, it's the same thing as with Libya. You had to go to Libya with a whole NATO force in order to do what? Wreck the country and take it over. Take out the gold, take over the oil, blah, blah, blah. All these kind of things. And the same thing is it again with Russia. The Russians are shit scared, you know. That's what they are.
Yes.
Exactly like the Libyans were. And now we are thinking that we should support Hitler because the Czechs were nasty to some German farmer or something, and the Polish were stamping on the borderline a minute or two. You know, that kind of thing is again here. Now we need the preemptive because Murmansk in the north of Russia is growing bigger. Okay, so it's growing bigger. Yeah, now we have to need a preemptive strike there also. It's very easy to find a reason for a general to make a strike.
Absolutely.
He can use whatever he likes, even peace.
what we got from the Downing Street memo. They admitted in the Downing Street memo the decision to invade Iraq had been made. They just needed to fix the propaganda around that. In other words, they had to find a way to sell it to ordinary people. But we understand who the aggressor is. We understand why they're aggressing. And it all comes down to a failed economy and trying to patch it up with other people's wealth.
Yes, and by the destruction, not only the other people's wealth, but by keeping some kind of destruction going on. So people should think that poverty is bad, but war is even worse. You know, you're threatening people with death in order to keep them in line, so to speak. This is horrible, you know. That has nothing to do with democracy.
You're absolutely right. Stephen, I'm going to have to let you go. We've got to take another commercial break. We've got other callers waiting on the line. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the telephones now. Stanley in Florida. Aloha, Stanley. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Stanley, are you there? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here. Do you hear me?
I hear you now.
You know, it's hard to keep a main question in mind when you're listening to so much baloney, let's say baloney, while I'm on the phone here. You know, it's just amazing.
I think I'm insulted.
Now, let me just tell you, you know, you talk about food problems like you go to the grocery store and you buy food that automatically makes you gain weight, you know, GMOs and all this stuff, but you never discuss the kosher industry. You know, these people that control this kosher industry, that control the grocery stores, they're the same people bringing the drugs into this country. They're the same people that brought the slaves into this country, but yet that's not an issue on your show. I just wonder why. I mean, is there a fine line?
We've talked about all those topics. We've talked about all those topics in the past here. We, as a matter of fact, I've mentioned that, you know, I like kosher food in part because it doesn't have the adulteration of the normal food. We've talked about the slave trade and who was really behind it. I would hesitate to say that same group of people is bringing the illegal drugs into this country, certainly because of the involvement of the Central Intelligence Agency in that process. And they basically guard their supply lines. The war on drugs is the war on other people's drugs, the war on the competition's drugs.
Wait a minute. You like kosher food, but yet
my first wife was Jewish.
The other food.
My first wife was Jewish.
You don't like other foods that make you fat, you say. You know, that you've been eating all your whole life and making you fat, that come in the guise of kosher. But
now, wait a minute.
Hypocrisy.
No,
it is hypocrisy.
Okay, you know, Stanley, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here because you're in here to try and grind an axe of racism that I personally do not want to grind. And again, I'm opposed to sweeping broad brush statements about these people did this, these people did that. All bad things that happen are done by small groups of individuals. That's why when we talk about what's going on in Israel, we're not talking about the Israeli people, who right now are actually very much opposed to what their government is doing. We talk about what the individuals in government are doing. Netanyahu. And we go with a we want to go with a pinpoint. This person did this bad thing. These people did this other, small groups. Okay, and just not say, well, these people did this, you know, they're responsible for all the evils. We're not going to go down that way. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Jerome in Santa Ana. Aloha, Jerome. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing okay.
Right on. I wanted to talk about geoengineering, but real quick, I wanted to give a shout-out to the Ron Gibson channel, which is where I get to watch your show from.
Yes.
Shout-out to Cryptic Thinker and Vic Trottier chatters. They're great folks. And secondly, real quick again, there's a 60 hertz buzz in the broadcast online. I don't know if you're hearing that or not in-house.
Is that the BAM user feed? Is that the video feed?
Correct. Yes, sir. It's 60 hertz. It might just be a ground switch or something. I don't know what's going on.
I got to replace
I'm not hearing
this.
it on the telephone
unit here.
You know, So just to let you know.
All right,
so
thanks.
anyways, geoengineering. So, like, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, please. My girlfriend loves to drink champagne, right?
Okay.
But she loves my non-filtered urine better.
Wow, come on. Come on. That's a little bit out there. Okay. You wanted to talk about ISIS?
Yeah, I'll talk about ISIS.
Yeah, let's go on to that topic.
I think they're a bunch of chicken cowards. I think ISIS is a bunch of chicken cowards.
Well, ISIS is a fake. They're a manufactured group. You know, we had this media campaign, phony beheadings to convince us they were the successors to Al-Qaeda, which was another manufactured group. But we found out that they were actually working on the side of the United States and Israel inside Syria. And the good news is the Syrian government and Russia...
I'm sorry to interrupt. I had a quick question just came to mind. I've been watching this guy named George Webb. Are you aware of that guy on YouTube?
No, not really.
There's a guy, George Webb, W-E-B-B, so William Epsilon Boy.
Okay.
And for about the past year and a half, he's been doing about 3 to 4 minute videos daily on the Awans, the DNC. He's actually sued, like put to court, sued the Podesta group. I think he's the one that
I have heard his name.
made them shut
I
down.
have heard his name, yes.
Stuff. Yeah, he's just all over the place, and he's really quite knowledgeable and stuff. In your downtime, I know you're probably very busy, but if you have time, man, check that guy out, George Webb.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be a great interview, man. You guys would be like peas and carrots. It'd be a wonderful show.
Okay.
Now, thank you for your time. I don't want to hold you up.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now empty, and we're going to actually do some real news here. Getting on back to science and health here. It has been 100 years since the Spanish influenza pandemic of 1918. It's now 2018, 100 years, and basically this flu infected 500 million people around the globe and killed anywhere between 20 and 50 million of them. And I even had people in my family tree who succumbed to this illness on my mother's side. I don't know about the father's side. We don't have the information here. So a lot of people are looking at it and looking at it in the context of the Aussie flu and saying, could this be as bad? Because this is a bad flu, especially when you consider that the current flu shot is totally ineffective against this. Now, there's an interesting history about the so-called Spanish flu. For one thing, it is misnamed. It didn't come from Spain. It actually it first emerged on a U.S. military base in Kansas. And interestingly enough, it emerged among a group of soldiers who'd been volunteers in a series of vaccine trials. But the soldiers were infected with the disease, and apparently because the incubation period was fairly long, some of them went on out and they were being rotated out to the remains of the battlefields of World War I. And that was a really dark time. World War I had just ended, the war to end all wars. Boy, there was a whopper of a lie. And these soldiers went on out all over the world, spreading the disease with them as they went. And it was a very nasty one. Interestingly, there is an anecdotal story that scientists in the aftermath of the, again, misnamed Spanish flu, noticed something very strange. There was a factory I think it was in Chicago, that manufactured Baker's cinnamon. You know, you go to the store, you get a little bottle of cinnamon powder, and the powder is made by simply grinding up the bark from a cinnamon tree. And we all know cinnamon, cinnamon rolls, cinnamon toast. And they noticed that none of the people working at this factory grinding up the cinnamon bark ever got the flu. And it's one of the clues that led scientists to realize that tree bark in general does contain defense mechanisms against illness, and that cinnamon is actually very effective at preventing certain illnesses. So if you've got the flu around you, You might want to think about getting some cinnamon buns for dinner. And I'm not saying it's absolutely going to protect you, but it couldn't hurt. Okay, let's get back onto computers. We're still seeing this circus over these CPU bugs / backdoors. And now, apparently, Microsoft issued a warning the other day that certain antivirus products were going to have to be disabled, or they were going to have to somehow be isolated because they weren't working with the patch for the meltdown bug on the chips. And it has to do with the way the patch is dealing with the meltdown bug. Now, the meltdown bug / backdoor opens up the kernel memory to outside access. The kernel memory is the most private protected memory on a computer. Normally, it is mapped at the very top of the memory range and declared off limits. The meltdown backdoor basically opens up that gate. And so the meltdown patch from Microsoft moves the kernel into its own private virtual memory address space. And by moving it like that, it's breaking various forms of antivirus security software that do have access to the kernel memory. So basically, Microsoft has moved its cookies out of the jar, and they basically spotted antivirus makers with their hands in the cookie jar, and they're saying that there's going to have to be some engineering to solve that. What a huge, huge mess. We already talked about Twitter giving Donald Trump's direct messages to Robert Mueller earlier. Oh, and we have another phone call. Tom in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good day, Michael. Yeah, Michael, yesterday I called you and I told you about the Kennedy situation with the 1965 Adjustment Act. I'm sorry I didn't straighten that out and said Ted Kennedy, of course.
Yeah, because John F. Kennedy was dead in 1963.
Right. That's why I hadn't said that it was the 65 Adjustment Act. But another thing is, you had a caller to call in yesterday after me, not long after, and he was talking about, well, this maybe he's racist, this guy. Well, maybe he's not. Listen, all I was bringing up was a 1900 statistic about blue eyes. And also, look at this there, Michael. In Sweden and Norway and all those countries that are predominantly are having blue eyes, look what's going to happen to Sweden in the next probably 50 years. Okay, that's the point of this matter here. What I was trying to suggest there. Now, that's what I was trying to get to. But now I'm listening to what the news is now about what's going on with DACA. This guy Goodlatte, Bob Goodlatte, I guess he's already now proposing, and the Democrats are going nuts, is that he's saying no, he's not going to give them citizenship, they're going to get a green card. Now you can work on that in a couple of years, but they're going to get green cards, and all the Democratic Party, going nuts. And they just had a leader, one of the people for the Democratic Party, say there's no way they're not going to go vote if Trump wants the wall. Basically, they're saying there's no wall, no deal. You put the wall, there ain't no deal. So I guess, Donald Trump's going to have to do like Dan Coulter said. He's asking to have to deport, kick them all out. They all have to go. Build the wall tall and deport them all. That's all I can tell you. You have to build the wall really tall.
I actually agree with you. I actually agree with you. I don't think the wall was going to work anyway. I think enforcement of the existing Title VIII laws is going to help. Cut off the financial incentive for these people to come here because that's what's luring them here. The Democrats have got all kinds of free stuff. Well, it's not free. The rest of America pays for it. But they're handing out all these goodies to anybody who can step across the border. It's a Title VIII violation right there. And this has got to stop. And yes, anybody who doesn't have the paperwork to be here, doesn't have a residency card, a green card, or citizenship, kick them out of the country. There's no reason for them to be here. And no, it is not racist. Illegal is not a race. We're just talking about a practical solution. This country is already overcrowded, especially in the job market. And this unrestrained immigration is leading to all kinds of problems with gang activity in this country. We're getting other nations' criminals are coming in here.
That's right, Michael. And I don't know if you had a chance to see they had the thing in Washington with Donald Trump and then the leader from Norway, a lady from Norway, And Donald Trump, he had a great little speech there, and he was right there to all those millions of people listening. Donald Trump said, well, listen, how come Israel can have a wall around it? And Israel's wall seems to be working pretty good. And by the way, Israel wants to kick off all their criminals. And as soon as he said, I noticed it was like, man, it was like a second delay on the TV.
Yes.
It was the strangest thing, but of course I know how that is. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, and it's not being racial, Michael, but listen, let's look at Hollywood. 2% of the population is controlling 99% of Hollywood, it seems like, with Weinstein and all these other schmucks out there. They're throwing a narrative down on the public, what you should see and what's good and what's bad. I mean, it's unbelievable. And again, look at the Supreme Court. Not being racial, Michael. 2% of the population, yet they have 50% of the power of the Supreme Court. Amazing situation. Maybe more. So,
well, my primary concern is less with the Supreme Court and more with the dual citizens, where you're not sure where their loyalties are really lying. And other countries do not allow dual citizens to work in the government, and I think that's a very wise and prudent policy. But you need to go back and look at the history of the film industry, because after Edison invented the motion picture camera and the Lumiere brothers invented projection, it was New York Jewish fur traders who actually started the entire motion picture industry in the United States, and they just sort of kept it inside the club since then. The reason they moved to Hollywood, the reason Hollywood even exists, is these early filmmakers were not paying royalties to the Edison company for the use of his motion picture technology. So they came out to Hollywood, where they had great weather for making movies, and it was just a short trip down to the border with Mexico if Edison's lawyers caught up with them, which never happened.
Right. I believe it used to be called Hollywoodland. Before it was called Hollywood, it used to call Hollywoodland. But
well, hang on. Let me respond to that. Let me respond to that here. The city has always been called Hollywood. There was a housing development up in the hills that was called Hollywoodland, and that's what that sign was built to advertise. It was built back in the 1920s. The letters back then were outlined with light bulbs. In fact, there was a guy who lived in a shack at the bottom of the sign, and his job was to replace the light bulbs as they burned out. And it was so bright you could see it all the way out to Catalina Island. And through the years, it fell into disrepair. The last four letters land were knocked over in an earthquake and never put back up again. And then the sign was replaced with a steel and concrete version for the Los Angeles Olympics. And I actually, hanging on my wall, I have a piece of the original wood framing from the Hollywoodland sign. So a little bit of history there.
Really cool. That's very cool. Yeah, Michael, but we see what Hollywood's doing to our country, basically. That's a joke, but yeah, I get it.
Tom, I got to let you go.
You're right about New York.
Tom, I got to let you go. We got to take a commercial break. I got one more caller waiting on the line we're going to close out the show with. We'll be right back. Hi, America, welcome back to the show here. I'm looking on the Fox News crawl, and apparently something like 32 Republican members of Congress are not going to be seeking re-election this November. So it looks to me like we may be dealing with a Democratic Congress. That means Trump is going to be dealing with a Democratic Congress, which is absolutely going to be dedicated to not letting him accomplish anything that he can campaign on in 2020. We're going to take one more phone call here, and we're going to go to Susan in Ohio. Aloha, Susan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I've been listening to you for about 4 years with my husband every day.
Thank you.
And I never call, but I have a comment. I couldn't believe the man who called you talking about urine.
Yeah.
I thought it was disgusting. And I thought you handled it very well. I just wanted to tell you that.
Well, you know, there's all kinds of people out there.
There's all kinds of people out there with different views.
There sure are. Some of them are actually...
He sure did have a different one, didn't he?
He was a little bit out there, and but there are people who actually are working for public relations firms in the government, and they'll call into shows like this to try and kookify them. I think that call qualifies as one of them.
Yeah.
Or to rant about the Jews like the other caller did, to try and damage our image, damage our branding, as it were. And I have very little patience for people like that. And we're a show that deals...
Wasting your time.
Yeah, they're not just wasting my time, not just wasting the listeners' time. Again, they're trying to make us appear kooky in an effort to drive audience members back to the warm embrace of corporate media.
Oh, yes. And I also wanted to say, tell your wife, Claire, prayers to her.
Thank you.
I hope she gets better soon.
I hope so, too.
And I enjoy listening to you. You really help out a lot. You have a lot of good information.
Well, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. I will pass on your prayers to Claire.
Okay, thank you. You have a good afternoon, evening, whatever it is.
All right. Well, thank you very much here, and we're going to let you go. We're coming up here to the end of the program. We're not going to take any more phone calls. This is a weird story. Apparently, this 17-year-old guy, Andrew Spensberger, has been charged with possession of child pornography after photos of a 2-year-old were found on his cell phone. This has happened in O'Fallon, Missouri, and he was turned in by his own father, who found the image on the cell phone, and apparently the 2-year-old was a relative of the father's girlfriend. That's just getting a little bit out there. And it's another reminder, as a nation, we've lost our moral compass. I mean, this idea that, anything is permitted, it's a lack of good parenting with, the dual income reality, the economic reality. The parents aren't there to provide any kind of moral guidance to young people anymore, and they just think that this stuff is okay. As you know, still a cold snap on the East Coast. A lot of people are very concerned. There are more homeless than there are homeless shelters, and there are American homeless who are being left out in the cold. And it raises a serious concern about whether they're going to be able to survive. And I know they've got all kind of tricks with rolled-up newspaper and stuff, but still in all, it is shameful to see all this money going to illegal immigrants and refugees and so little taking care of real Americans. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. And please stay tuned to John Stedmiller's program. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcast.